Hi there, Andre here from Peak Motorcycles. In this video I'm going to be replacing the stock Ducati shock on my 2016 Scrambler 800 with a new shiny Ohlins shock with a yellow spring. It's very exciting, isn't it? So before I actually start on this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple of measurements because everybody loves measurements. What I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the seat height, both with the low seat that's on it now and also with the high seat on it. And I'm going to measure it first of all with the bike on the side stand, because I think for a lot of people getting on and off a bike is kind of important. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the distance from the base of the seat probably to the foot peg down there. And then what I can do is when I'm actually sitting on the bike, I can measure the distance between the foot peg and the ground and actually get an idea about just how low it is when you're sitting on it. The reason why I think that's important is because it's, you really do want to measure it from the low point of the seat, but when you're actually sitting on the bike, that is quite a difficult point to measure from. So if I can take a measure from, the low point of the seat down to a reference point further down on the bike, then I'm going to measure it with me on it with the high seat and then with Mrs. Peak Motorcycles on the low seat. And we can hopefully give you some information about just how high or low this bike is actually going to be. So these measurements will be the before. I'm then going to replace the rear shock, going to measure again, and then there's going to be a separate video where I'm going to replace the fork springs, put in some new fork oil, and also drop the forks about 10 millimeters in the clamps. Exactly the same thing. I'll measure the seat height both before and after, just to give you that point of reference so you know how much difference it really makes by just dropping the forks a little bit. Hopefully all that makes sense. So here we go. So the first measurement I'm going to take is of the low point on the bike when it's on its side stand. So this is really to give people an indication of how easy the bike is to get on and off. So 735 millimeters like that. I'm just going to switch the seat to the high seat and I'll measure again. So to take exactly the same measurement, it's a bit difficult to say where the lowest point is, but I suspect it's probably somewhere around there. So that is 75, so that's 800 millimeters with the high seat on. So that's lifting it by just over 6 centimeters. For those of you who do inches, that's about 2.5 inches between the low seat and the high seat. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a measurement of how high the bike is to the top. I don't know if you can see on here, on this fitting, I've got this white sticker with a level line on the top. So I'm just going to stand the bike upright. This is without any load on it. I'm just going to measure that. And then as the bike is sat on by both me and Mrs. Peak Motorcycles, I'll measure that point again, see how much further down it comes. And then from that, I can see how much lower it is. So the first measurement I'm going to take is I'm going to just put the bike level. So this is with the high seat on. Not that should make any difference. So I'm just going to hold that up and my assistant could tell me what that reads.
70.5.
So 70.5 plus 5 at the bottom, so that's 75.5 for that one. I'm just going to put the bike down a sec. So I'm now going to sit on the bike. This is with a high seat on it. I do have my feet on the ground, which I know means that it's going to lift very slightly, but I think for the purpose of this exercise, it should be good enough.
67.2.
67.2 centimeters. So I've just switched the seat back over to the low seat. Mrs. Peak Motorcycles is going to sit on the bike now, do the same sort of thing that I just did, and I'm just going to check how much less it goes down. So it's 3.3 centimeters when I was sitting on it. I'm measuring that is 69.5, so 695 millimeters. So that's actually about 2 centimeters less, so it's actually only going down by 1 centimeter when she sits on it. So I think that's all the measurements I'm going to take initially. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch the shock out for the new Ohlins shock. I'll do the normal stuff with filming the removal. I'll do a comparison side by side for the two, put it on again, and then we'll do a similar sort of measurement and just see how the bike is after the shock has been changed. So the instructions fitting the Ohlins shock are very straightforward. It just says remove these 2 bolts, put the new shock in, remove the washer from here because you don't need it, and put the bolts back in. So that all seems pretty straightforward. The challenge seems to be is that these bolts do seem to be extremely firm indeed. And this one in particular, given that I use the pillion peg to lift the bike, I'm not sure whether I'll actually be able to get into it. Nevertheless, here we go. So for the first one, it's a 6mm hex through there with a 12mm bolt nut on the other side. Now, I know this makes some people wince, but it is going to need just an open spanner, just simply because there's the frame on the other side, so there's not enough space to get a ring spanner onto it. So what I'm going to try and do is get that held on the other side, turn it round enough so that it's braced against something, and then use a 6mm drive on the long handle, and hopefully that should just undo. Okay, so that is definitely turning at the back. You probably can't see that, but I have just about managed to get that on there. So I'll see if I can hold that in place, or even brace it against the frame. Yeah, there we go. That wasn't too bad. That seems to have come out quite easily. So what I'm going to see if I can do is if I can just loosen that a little bit. I'll just take the nut out from around the back. There we go, that's what was on the back there. So I'm just going to leave that in so it doesn't fall away. I'm now going to see what I can get into the one lower down. So that one is an 8mm socket, so I can get my Bondus wrench onto it. Let's see if I can move it with a big handle. Not moving very much. I do have an 8mm socket, but I don't know if I'll get my I won't get my driver onto the end of that. So yeah, so rather than use my flexible wrench for this, I've actually got just a standard hex wrench, which hopefully I can fit in that. There we go. Let's get a long handle on that. It really is very firmly stuck. Maybe before I do that, I'll just spray some lubricant in. What I think this is that it's actually a steel bolt into an alloy swing arm that's got corroded and got stuck. Now, I've had this once before on a different bike. I used to have a BMW R850R, and I remember trying to get a bolt out of that, and it was steel into alloy. And in the end, the only thing that got it out was heat. So what I have here is a very small gas torch, a very thin flame. So I'm going to see if I can just heat the end of the bolt, and only the end of the bolt, nothing else. I do have an electric heat gun, but I think the chances of getting it in there, because it's such a small hole, are pretty remote. So here goes. Even that's proving quite difficult to get in there. I suspect it's going to need more than that to actually heat it, but as a first go. No movement at all. Still nothing. I think maybe I'll try the heat again. If it still doesn't move, then I think I might try getting a hammer on it, or an impact wrench. If that doesn't work, well, when it goes in for the service, I'll see if the Ducati guys can do anything with it. Nope, that's really not moving. So I think that's going to be a request to Ducati when the bike goes in for a service. We'll see if they can remove that for me. Nope, I think that's a no from that. So I'm still here. A day has passed since I got annoyed with the bolt that wouldn't come out of the rear shock on what should have been a really simple thing to do on my Ducati Scrambler. So I was going to take it to the dealer when it goes into the service and get them to do it, but I got up this morning and decided that I was not going to be defeated. So I have a few things that are to show you that have progressed since yesterday. So the big thing that you might be able to tell here is that I did actually get this bolt out. So this is a steel bolt that was very much fused to the aluminium swing arm. From looking at the head of it, it looks like it even might have been part of the head that was actually causing it to seize. To get it out took quite a lot of work, which involved that hammer, that rather long 1/2 inch bar with some impact wrenches. I have a battery impact wrench. I also have my air impact wrench. And what you can also see there is a heat gun. And I also had a gas torch. So a few things I had to do. I didn't film it just because I didn't think it would work. And frankly, the whole thing yesterday was so deeply, deeply frustrating that I'd nearly given up. So what I have taken off, which you can see just down on the floor there, is this piece. So what I will do is film the reassembly, but to talk you through what I did to take it off, it will be the reverse when I put it back on, is that whole piece basically bolts on here. There's a bolt that goes through there. There's a bolt that goes through here onto the catalytic converter. There's the bolt that holds up the side stand that goes through there, another one through there, and then you reattach the gear shift linkage to it as well. So all of those were taken off really just so I could get some proper access onto this bolt. I tried various things. The impact wrenches didn't seem to work. Neither did hitting it with a hammer, just trying to sort of shock it loose just to see if I could just break that chemical seal that occurs. In the end, I just managed to get it really hot, so I used an electric heat gun to actually heat up the whole swing arm all the way around, including the end of the existing shock. That seemed to get hot enough so you could barely touch it. I then got a gas torch just inside the hole onto the end of the bolt and got that really hot. And then with the long, I think it's like a 2 foot, maybe sort of just slightly more than half a metre long Wera 1/2 inch drive, and a lot of effort, I did actually manage to get it to come off. So delighted that I've managed to do that. What I am going to do now is I'm just going to show you the replacement of the shock. I'll do a very quick comparison side by side when they're off the bike. Hopefully refitting the Ohlins shock should be very straightforward. I'll then have to put this arm back on, so at least then you'll be able to see what I had to take off from in here in order to fit it. So yeah, so that should be a nice finish to this video instead of having to leave it half done and then have it come back from the dealer when they've had a fight with it. So yeah, delighted I did manage to get it to all come together. So now just to finish off the fitting. So now I have the bike. It's actually balanced on a block under here. I've taken it off the rear track stand. The front wheel is chocked as well, so it seems to be stable enough. The back wheel is just on the ground. So what I'm going to do now is just take out this bolt the rest of the way. There we go. So I'll definitely lube that up properly before that gets refitted. So I'll take the top one out as well. So this is the one I did manage to get out quite easily yesterday. It's a bit tricky to get the 15mm wrench in around the back. I've seen people try to do it round on this side, but I found underneath seemed to be the easiest option. There we go. Now I think what I need to do is actually lift the bike a little bit, just so that the swing arm drops away and I can actually remove that, because currently that is still very securely in place. So what it kind of looks like is that because that washer's in there, I think there's actually a bit on the edge of this side of the shock which can't go back far enough. So I think I do need to find a way to get that out of the back. Just not sure how. It's quite depressing. After the elation of getting this bolt out and now getting stuck with a washer seems just completely trivial. Well, there we go. So that just seemed to come out relatively easily. I guess it's just getting the screwdriver in the right place. Oh, there we go. And here we go. So that was the washer that was holding it all in. So there's this slight edge, as you can see on here, and because this was in on the far side, that was basically stopping it from moving. So there we have it. That is now all out. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean it up in there and get some grease ready to put it back together. Then I'll do a comparison of the two shocks side by side. So I just want to show you what was causing the problem. So this is the view of the very top of the swing arm, and that's where the end of the shock goes. Now that is very much a well from which there is no drain hole. So I think that basically what happens is it's got those smooth, unfinished aluminium faces, aluminum if you're on the other side of the Atlantic, which I guess will corrode just because that's what it does when it's exposed. And any grit or salt or moisture that gets in there has got no way to get out. So to be honest, after 6 years of riding and washing, I'm kind of not surprised that there's some corrosion in there. Anyway, I'll clean it up as best I can before I refit the shock, and I'm going to grease up all those faces as well, and hopefully it's not quite as painful if I ever have to do this again. So now I'm going to do the bit that at least half of you hate but half of you quite like, so I'm going to do it anyway. If you don't like seeing things being weighed, by all means skip to the next bit, it's far more interesting. Anyway, here we go. So this is the stock shock as it comes from Ducati. I'm just going to put that on there, see if I can get it to come to a point of rest. 2582 grams, so 2.582 kilos. If I compare that with the Ohlins So 2.082-ish, so it's about half a kilo lighter, which is not insignificant. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, with the weight of the bike and the weight of the rider, half a kilo is barely going to be noticed, but half a kilo lighter is better than half a kilo heavier. Just while I've got it here, I'll move that out of the way, just give you a quick comparison of the two shocks side by side. So, yeah, I mean, the Ohlins shock just looks better made, really, as you would expect. All these pieces are nicely machined, CNC cut aluminium instead of the rather slightly knackered end bearing on the stock shock. And again, this is the end that's been in that well in the rear swing arm where all that corrosion's occurred, which really is quite annoying. You would have thought Ducati could have done something better with that, but hey, it is what it is. So yeah, so that's that. As you can see, looking at the other end, similar sort of deal. It's nicely machined CNC alloy on the Ohlins, and it's just some welded steel on the stock one. The preload adjustment is actually significantly, it's just basically steps which you do with that single ring on the stock shock, and it's these two lock rings on the Ohlins to apply that, put it on. Oh, and this one, most importantly, is yellow. Right then, now to fit this to the bike. So a few things I think to point out before I reassemble this. So first of all, I'm going to coat both of these inside faces just with some general grease. I'm going to put a little bit of copper assembly grease in the hole at the end, and then also a bit onto the nut, because this is where the steel is coming into contact with the aluminium, and I think that's where it's actually causing the problem. The washer that was in there before, you don't need. So that was the one that was the tricky one to get out. So that was this one. You don't need with the Ohlins shock. It's already machined to fit the gap exactly. So that's kind of it. I'm not really going to talk much through this. It's already been far too infuriating, all really to change 2 bolts. But nevertheless, I shall go about fitting this back on. If there's anything I think that's worth pointing out, I shall stop and do that. Otherwise, it's just going to be a few seconds of fast forward. Did notice there was a bit of corrosion at the back here. I'm just going to clean that up. Just making sure that face is greased. I'll grease the pins before they go in as well. Basically there's grease everywhere. So I'm going to put the shock in the same way the other one came out. So here you go. Again, I'm going to grease up that eye. And actually, while it's in my hand, I think I might as well do the top end as well. That fits in there like that. Yeah, it's a pretty snug fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this bottom bolt in, and then once that's in, I'm going to lower it down on the stand, and then that will make the top hole line up. So that was the accursed bolt from before. So I'm just going to clean off all that old grease and anything else that might be in there. There we go. So before I refit that, I'm just going to put some copper assembly grease on that thread. It might not stop it from bonding again in the future, but if it just means it's very slightly easier, then it will all have been worth it. It won't come off inside, but it is quite sort of sticky stuff, but it's like that for a reason. Hopefully I can still get it on. What I will do is I'm going to push it in, and once it's in, I'm just going to put a bit more around that end, because that's up buttered. This bit I think also bonded, had buttered up against in there. So a bit of regular grease on the moving bit. Might seem like overkill, but after the pain I had before and seeing the corrosion around the top of that, I think any extra bit like that is worth it. I'm actually just going to leave that a little bit loose until I've got the other one in, and then I can do it up all the way. It really does make a mess, but it is good stuff. I'm going to lower that down very slowly. Not sure if you can see it on there, but there we go. So again, with that bolt, it's going to be a bit of a clean up, and just put a load of new grease on it. There we go. I'll get those torqued up properly afterwards. So now both of these need to be tightened to 42 Newton meters. So I'll do the lower one first. Might be interesting getting it up to the right torque with the spanner on the back, but I'm sure it's probably fine. Okay, so that's all in. So the next bit, which you didn't see me remove because I did it all when I was cross with not being able to get the bolt out, is everything for the peg hanger and the pillion pegs. So I'm just going to refit all of that back on the bike. So that swing arm bolt is 55 Newton meters, which I can just about get on with the short torque wrench, but I have a bigger one for the car, so I might as well use that. There we go. So I think that is everything back together. It was a bit more of an epic than I thought it would be, but yeah, the suspension's on. So a load more time has passed. In that time, the bike has been serviced, it's got new tyres on it. So this video is already far too long, so I'm just going to do these last measurements really quickly. The first one is to repeat what I did right at the beginning of the video. So that is to set this level across the seat. This is just to see when it's on its side stand just how low it could be. And that measures, that's about bang on 700. And again, for the high seat, 75.5 centimetres. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, and this is what I did before we changed it, is I'm just going to stand the bike upright. I'm just going to measure the height from when the bike is in the upright position and just make a note of that. And this is just to give the comparison when sitting on the bike. So that measures 72.5, so with the extra 50 millimetres added on for the black bit at the bottom of the ruler, that's 77.5, just as it is with no weight on the bike. So what I'm now going to do is I'm now going to get on. And again, I know my feet are just on the ground, so that will affect it a little bit, but it'll be good enough for this, I think. 69, okay, so plus 5, that's 74. Now I'm just going to switch the seat back again. So now I've got the low seat back on, so we're going to do the same measurement again with Mrs. Peak Motorcycles on the bike, and we'll just see how much it goes down with her on the low seat. Okay, so I measure that to be just over 70 centimetres, about 703 millimetres, so plus the 5, so that's 753. So that's it. That is the end of what should have been my really short video about how to replace the shock on this bike. The instructions said just remove 2 bolts, take the shock out, put the new shock in, do the bolts up, and it was done. Now, a lot of the extra time came from the fact that that steel bolt was seized into the aluminium swing arm. So even if you're not interested in replacing the shock on a Ducati Scrambler, that might be something that's useful somewhere along the way. Quick summary of the numbers. Didn't make that much difference to the seat height, although it has gone up very, very slightly. When it's on its side stand, that was measuring the level point from what I thought was the lowest point on the seat. In both cases, it's gone up by between 5 and 10 millimetres. So putting the Ohlins shock has just lifted it slightly. I think that's just because of sag reduction. When sitting on the bike, there was an even bigger difference. And again, I think this is just because it's now sprung correctly. For me, I actually compressed the shock 2 centimetres instead of 4, and Mrs. Peak Motorcycles compressed the shock 1 centimetre instead of 2 when she was sitting on it. I've ridden this bike on the road a few times. I took it in to be serviced, and it does feel a lot better. It does feel a lot more settled. I think it is an improvement, but by putting the Ohlins shock on the bike, it has not made it lower. If anything, it has made it very, very slightly higher. So there's still a few more things to do to try and make this bike a bit lower. One is to replace the springs in the forks and then also lift the forks up very slightly in the triple clamp. I don't want to do it too much because I don't want to change the geometry of the bike a lot. But I think just to bring it up a little bit will at least offset, if not slightly lower it based on what I did at the back end. I think about 10 millimeters is about acceptable. Beyond that, I was going to look around to see if I could find a Ducati Scrambler low seat, which is 20 millimeters lower than stock, and maybe even see if I could get that adjusted, because this one is just the standard seat that has been lowered. But nevertheless, we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping to get the suspension done before I go away, and then it'll have a good long sort of 2,000-mile road test around Ireland, just to see how the new suspension is performing. Anyway, if you watched this long, thank you so much. I appreciate it went on far longer than it should have done. If it has been interesting and useful, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.